Have you ever wondered what happens when a man throws away a diamond for a piece of glass, only to discover that diamond was the bedrock of his entire world? This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's a story of brutal betrayal and epic consequence. Gavin Reed, a self-made tech mogul, thought he had it all: a thriving company, a beautiful new lover, and the freedom from what he saw as his plain, unassuming wife. He handed her divorce papers with a cold smile, ready to start his new life. He had no idea that by sunrise the next morning, the empire he cherished would begin to crumble to dust, all because of a single phone call his ex-wife made to a man he never knew existed. The silence in the minimalist, white-walled penthouse was a weapon. It was a cold, heavy thing that Gavin Reed wielded with practiced ease. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the glittering lights of downtown Los Angeles sprawling beneath him like a carpet of fallen stars. He looked like a king surveying his domain. His company, Valerius Innovations, was his kingdom, and he was its undisputed ruler. Across the vast living room, his wife, Audrey, sat on a custom-designed sofa that had cost more than a mid-sized car. She was clutching a porcelain teacup, her knuckles white. For 12 years, she had been the quiet, unassuming partner to his explosive ambition. She managed their homes, organized the charity galas that burnished his public image, and provided a serene refuge from his corporate wars. To Gavin, she was part of the architecture of his success, necessary but ultimately replaceable, like a foundational beam he no longer needed. "I don't think you're hearing me, Audrey," Gavin said, his voice devoid of warmth. He turned from the window, his handsome face set in a mask of impatient finality. He was wearing a bespoke suit, even at this late hour. He was always performing. "It's over. The lawyers have drawn up everything. It's more than generous. You'll never have to worry about a thing." Audrey finally looked up. Her eyes, a soft, gentle hazel, were clear. There were no tears. That seemed to annoy him. He was expecting a scene, a breakdown, something to validate the gravity of his decision. Her stillness was a quiet rebellion. 12 years, Gavin," she said, her voice a low murmur. "And you announce it like you're closing a business deal." "It is a business deal in a way," he retorted, waving a dismissive hand. "A partnership that has reached its end. People change. I've changed. I need something. More." The word hung in the air. More. She knew what more was. More was Kendra, his secretary, a woman 10 years younger, with a razor-sharp ambition that mirrored his own, and a ruthless disregard for the wreckage she left in her wake. Audrey had seen the signs for months: the late nights, the lingering scent of unfamiliar perfume on his suits, the sudden, icy distance. She wasn't a fool, just a woman who had desperately hoped her vows meant something more than a contract. "Does more have a name?" Audrey asked, her voice steady. Gavin's jaw tightened. "Her name is irrelevant to this arrangement. This is about us. Or rather, the lack of us. I'm in love with someone else, Audrey. I want to build a life with her. A real life, full of passion and drive." The insult was clear. Her life with him, the one she had dedicated herself to building, was not real. It was a placeholder. She placed the teacup on the marble coffee table with a soft click. "And Valerius Innovations, your empire, was that real?" A proud, smug smile touched his lips. "Of course. I built that from nothing. My blood and sweat are in every circuit board, every line of code. It's my legacy." "Yes," she said softly. "Your legacy." He strode over and dropped a thick manila envelope on the table beside her cup. "Sign them. My lawyer will be in touch with yours. You can keep the penthouse. I've already moved my things to my new place." He didn't say our new place. He was already erasing her. "I don't have a lawyer," she said quietly. He laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "Then get one, a good one, though it won't matter. The prenup is ironclad. You get the settlement we agreed to a decade ago. It's a pittance compared to what I'm worth now, but it's what you signed." He looked at her, a flicker of pity crossing his face. It was the most insulting expression she had ever seen. "You were a good wife, Audrey, in your own way. But you were never built for the life I'm leading now. You're comfortable. I need sharp. I need a killer." He turned to leave, his shoulders squared, already moving on to his next conquest. "Gavin," she called out. He paused at the door, impatient. "What?" "Good luck," she said. He smirked. "Luck is for amateurs, Audrey. I make my own." And then he was gone. The heavy door clicked shut, and the silence that rushed back in was different. It was no longer his weapon. It was her own. She sat there for a long time, the city lights blurring into abstract streaks of color. He thought he knew her. He thought she was the gentle, unassuming woman who arranged flowers and planned dinner parties. He had forgotten who she was before she met him. He had forgotten the name she had given up to take his. After an hour of stillness, Audrey reached into her handbag and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her contacts, past the caterers, the florists, and the society friends who were really Gavin's friends. She went all the way to the bottom, to a name she hadn't called in over a year. She pressed the button and listened to it ring, a world away. A deep, calm voice answered on the second ring. "Audrey, is everything all right, sweetheart?" Tears finally welled in her eyes, hot and sharp, not tears of sadness, but of a deep, sorrowful rage. "Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It's over. He left me." There was a pause on the other end of the line. It wasn't a hesitation, but a gathering of immense, terrifying force. It was the silence before a storm. "I see," her father said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous frequency. "Tell me his name again. The name of his company." "Valerius Innovations," she said. "Gavin Reed." "Good," Jonathan Beaumont said from his study in Geneva, a global map glowing on a screen behind him. "Don't worry about a thing, Audrey. A car will be there in 30 minutes to take you to the airport. The jet is being prepared. It's time for you to come home." He paused. "As for Mr. Reed, consider his empire a memory." Gavin Reed felt like a god. Driving his Aston Martin DB11 through the canyons of Beverly Hills, with Kendra's laughter filling the car, he was invincible. Kendra was everything Audrey wasn't: fierce, overtly ambitious, and sexually voracious. She saw him not as a husband, but as a prize she had won, and that fueled his ego more than any successful IPO. "I still can't believe how easy that was," Kendra said, running a manicured finger down his arm. "I expected screaming, crying, maybe a thrown vase or two." "Audrey's not the type," Gavin said with a shrug. "She's passive, always has been. She'll sign the papers, take her settlement, and fade away. That's her purpose." They spent the weekend in a bubble of hedonistic celebration, champagne, exclusive clubs, and passionate nights in his new, ultra-modern glass house overlooking the city. He felt reborn. On Monday morning, he walked into the headquarters of Valerius Innovations with Kendra on his arm. He didn't care about the whispers, the stares. He wanted them to stare. He was the king, and this was his new queen. He called a senior staff meeting. He expected to walk in to applause and congratulations. His company had just landed a massive, game-changing contract with the Department of Defense to develop next-generation navigation systems. It was the culmination of years of work, a deal that would elevate Valerius from a successful tech company to a global powerhouse. But the mood in the boardroom was funereal. His COO, a sharp, no-nonsense man named Ben Carter, looked pale. "What's wrong?" Gavin asked, his good mood instantly evaporating. "You all look like someone died." Ben cleared his throat. "Gavin, we have a problem. A big one. I got a call an hour ago from the Pentagon." "And? Did they send the champagne?" Gavin joked. "They're putting the NavGen contract on indefinite hold," Ben said, his words landing like stones. "They cited an unforeseen security review of our primary financial backers. They were incredibly vague, but also incredibly firm. The deal is frozen." Gavin stared at him. "What? That's impossible. We passed every security check. Our backers are blue-chip firms. Who did you speak to?" "General Morrison's office," Ben replied. I've never heard them sound so cold. It was like talking to a brick wall. An unease, foreign and unwelcome, coiled in Gavin's stomach. This was a multi-billion-dollar deal. It didn't just get frozen without a reason. "Fine, it's a bureaucratic hiccup. Get on the phone with our lobbyists. I'll call Morrison myself. This is just a misunderstanding." But it wasn't just a misunderstanding. As Gavin spent the morning making calls, he hit nothing but walls. General Morrison was suddenly unavailable. His lobbyists were hearing whispers of a credibility issue, but couldn't get any specifics. It was like a ghost had entered their system and was methodically deleting their access. By noon, the second blow landed. Their primary investor, a massive private equity firm named Sterling Finch Capital, requested an emergency teleconference. Gavin, Ben, and the CFO gathered in the boardroom, staring at the face of Robert Sterling on the large screen. Sterling was an old guard titan of industry, a man whose presence commanded respect. "Gavin," Sterling began, his voice like gravel, "we're divesting from Valerius, effective immediately." The room went cold. "What?" Gavin stammered. "Robert, what the hell are you talking about? We're on the verge of going public. Your shares will be worth 10 times what you paid for them." "Market conditions have changed," Sterling said, his eyes betraying nothing. "We're reallocating our assets." "Market conditions? The market is booming. This makes no sense," Gavin yelled, his composure cracking. "We've been partners for 5 years. You can't just pull out." "Our contractual exit clauses are quite clear," Sterling said calmly. "Our legal team will be in touch. Goodbye, Gavin." The screen went blank. Panic, raw and real, began to set in. Sterling Finch wasn't just an investor. They were a seal of approval. Their backing gave Valerius credibility. Their divestment would send a shock wave of doubt through the entire tech industry. "What is going on?" the CFO, a man named Paul, whispered, wiping sweat from his brow. "First the DOD, now Sterling Finch. This isn't random. Someone is targeting us." Gavin's mind raced. A corporate rival? A disgruntled former employee? It had to be someone powerful. He spent the rest of the day on the phone, calling every contact he had, every banker, every political insider. The response was the same everywhere. A polite but firm distance. Doors that had always been open were now closed and locked. It was like his name, once a golden key, had turned to lead. He stumbled out of the office late that night, his head pounding. Kendra was waiting for him in his office, looking worried. The office gossip had turned from her scandalous arrival to whispers of corporate crisis. "What's happening, Gav?" she asked, her voice laced with an anxiety that irritated him. "People are saying the DOD deal is dead." "It's a temporary setback," he snapped, loosening his tie. "Someone's playing games. I'll figure it out. I always do." But as he stared out at the city lights from his office window, the same view he'd had that night with Audrey, a cold dread washed over him. He had told her that luck was for amateurs. But this didn't feel like bad luck. It felt like a deliberate, calculated, and terrifyingly efficient attack. It felt like a whisper campaign that had turned into a hurricane, and he was standing at its center, completely exposed. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in corporate demolition. The attack on Valerius Innovations was not a blitzkrieg. It was a siege. It was quiet, insidious, and utterly devastating. On Tuesday morning, Gavin woke to a dozen frantic emails. Their primary supplier of microprocessing chips, a company in Taiwan they had an exclusive relationship with, had invoked a force majeure clause and cancelled all future shipments, citing unforeseen geopolitical supply chain disruptions. This was absurd. Valerius was their biggest customer. They had just renewed a 5-year contract. When Gavin's head of operations tried to call their contact, he found the man no longer worked there. No one seemed to know where he'd gone. Simultaneously, the bank that held their largest line of credit, a line essential for managing cash flow and payroll, called an emergency covenant review. They claimed to have received troubling anonymous information regarding the company's long-term financial stability. Their credit was frozen pending the review, effectively cutting off Valerius's oxygen supply. Gavin was in a constant state of rage, alternating between screaming at his subordinates and trying to charm his way past the stone walls that had risen around him. Nothing worked. It was as if a directive had been issued from an unseen power. Gavin Reed is to be isolated. Valerius is to be starved. The media got wind of the story by Tuesday afternoon. A prominent tech blog published a scathing article titled, "Is the Valerius Bubble About to Burst?" It cited anonymous sources from within the Pentagon and Wall Street, all questioning Gavin's leadership and the company's dubious accounting practices. The article was a masterpiece of innuendo and character assassination. It didn't make any direct accusations that could be challenged in court, but it painted a picture of a house of cards on the verge of collapse. Valerius's stock, which was privately traded but tracked by investors, plummeted in value. Key employees, the brilliant engineers and programmers Gavin had poached from rivals with promises of lucrative stock options, started to panic. Their net worth was evaporating before their eyes. Resumes began to fly out of the Valerius headquarters like confetti. Kendra, who had pictured herself as the glamorous partner of a tech titan, was finding the reality of a corporate crisis far less appealing. The whispers in the office were no longer about her affair. They were about the impending layoffs. The admiring glances had been replaced by looks of resentment. She was the woman who had arrived just as the ship began to sink. "You have to do something," she demanded Tuesday night, pacing the glass house that now felt more like a cage. "They're ruining you, Gavin. They're ruining us. What do you think I've been doing?" he roared, throwing a crystal tumbler against the wall, where it shattered with a deafening crash. "I'm being ghosted by the entire world. Every call I make, every email I send, it's like I don't exist anymore." He collapsed onto a sofa, his head in his hands. For the first time, a sliver of doubt entered his mind. This was too coordinated, too vast. This wasn't a business rival. No single company had this much reach, this much influence across so many different sectors: military, finance, manufacturing, media. Who could pull the strings of the Pentagon, a Wall Street giant, and a Taiwanese tech supplier all at the same time? His mind, for the first time in days, drifted to Audrey. He pictured her in their old penthouse, probably crying, probably calling her mother for comfort. Plain, passive Audrey. It was impossible for her to be connected to this. She barely knew what he did for a living, beyond the fact that it made them rich. Her world was small, contained. This was a war fought by giants, and yet He couldn't shake the timing. His world had been perfect until the moment he'd left her. He'd walked out that door and into a nightmare. Coincidence? It had to be. On Wednesday, the final wall of his fortress crumbled. Ben Carter, his COO and the only person he felt he could trust, walked into his office and placed his resignation on the desk. "You too, Ben?" Gavin asked, his voice hollow. "I thought you were a fighter." "I am," Ben said, his face grim. "But this isn't a fight. It's an execution. I have a family, Gavin. I can't go down with this ship. And you should know. I got a job offer this morning." "From who? Google? Apple?" Ben shook his head. "From a company I've never heard of. A private consulting firm. But the offer was astronomical. More than I could ever make here. And it came through a headhunter who said his client had a vested interest in my future." "What does that mean?" Gavin asked, a cold knot tightening in his gut. "It means they're not just destroying you, Gavin," Ben said, his eyes filled with a strange kind of pity. "They're poaching your best assets while they do it. This is a strip mine operation. Whoever is doing this, they don't just want you to fail. They want you erased, wiped from the map. Who in God's name did you piss off?" The question hung in the air long after Ben had left. Who? Gavin sat alone in his office, the empire he'd built, his legacy, collapsing around him in silence. He was out of options. He had one last, desperate card to play. He needed to get back in front of Robert Sterling, the man from Sterling Finch Capital. He needed to understand the source of the attack. He called Sterling's office, expecting to be blocked by a secretary, but to his surprise, he was put right through. "I need to see you, Robert," Gavin pleaded. "Just 5 minutes. I need to understand why." There was a pause. "Fine," Sterling's voice came back, cold as ice. "My office. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. But don't come here looking for a reprieve, Gavin. Come for an education." Gavin arrived at the imposing skyscraper that housed Sterling Finch Capital, feeling like a condemned man walking to his own execution. He had spent the night sleeplessly staring at the ceiling, the name Audrey echoing in his mind. It was a ludicrous thought, a mad fantasy, yet it was the only variable that had changed in his perfect life. Robert Sterling's office was the epitome of old-world power. Dark mahogany, leather-bound books, and a view that encompassed all of Manhattan. Sterling, a man in his late 60s with a mane of silver hair and eyes that had seen the rise and fall of countless corporate kings, was standing by the window. He didn't turn when Gavin entered. "You wanted to know why, Gavin," Sterling said, his voice calm. "You think this is about business. You think a rival is trying to take you out. You're a smart man, but in this, you are a fool." "Then tell me," Gavin said, his voice raw. "What is this about?" Sterling finally turned. His expression was not one of anger, but of profound disappointment. "This is about a promise, one I made a very long time ago to a very dear friend." He gestured to a chair. Gavin sat, his hands clenched into fists. 30 years ago, Sterling began. "When I was just starting out, my first venture was on the brink of collapse. I was young, arrogant, and in way over my head. I was about to lose everything. Then a man stepped in. He wasn't a banker or a loan shark. He was a quiet, unassuming investor from Europe who saw something in my idea. He didn't just give me money. He gave me guidance. He taught me the difference between building a company and building an empire. He taught me about loyalty, honor, and the unspoken rules that govern the real world, the world above the noise of the stock market." Gavin listened, confused. What does this have to do with me? "That man," Sterling continued, his eyes boring into Gavin's, "was Jonathan Beaumont. The name meant nothing to Gavin. He'd never heard it before. "Beaumont is not a name you read about in Forbes or the Wall Street Journal," Sterling said, sensing his confusion. "He doesn't have a company that trades on the NASDAQ. His empire is a ghost. It exists in the shadows, a vast, global network of companies, funds, and political influence built over generations. He controls the supply chains others depend on. He owns the small, critical component manufacturers that giants like Apple and Samsung can't live without. He holds the debt of developing nations. He doesn't own the board. He owns the people on the board." A terrifying, impossible thought began to form in Gavin's mind. It was so outlandish that he almost laughed. Sterling saw the dawning horror on his face. "Yes, Gavin. Jonathan Beaumont is a very private man. He values his anonymity above all else. But there is one thing he values more: his daughter." Gavin felt the blood drain from his face. The room seemed to tilt. "Audrey?" he whispered. "Audrey Beaumont," Sterling corrected him, the name landing with the force of a physical blow. When his only child decided to marry a brash, ambitious young software developer 12 years ago, he was concerned. But she loved you. So he made a decision. He would help you. Anonymously. Sterling walked over to his desk and picked up a file. He tossed it onto the coffee table in front of Gavin. "Open it." Gavin's hands trembled as he opened the folder. Inside were flowcharts, financial statements, lists of names. He saw his own company's history laid bare, but with a hidden layer he'd never known existed. "Your first seed investor?" Sterling said, pointing to a name. "That was a shell corporation owned by a Beaumont subsidiary. That lucky break with the patent dispute? Beaumont's lawyers intervened through a third party. Your biggest clients, your most reliable suppliers, even Ben Carter, your COO, who you thought you discovered. All of them were guided to you, supported by you, and ultimately loyal to the Beaumont network." Gavin stared at the documents, his reality shattering piece by piece. His self-made empire, his legacy, his genius. It was all a lie. He had been playing in a sandbox, built and maintained by his wife's father, and he had never even known it. "He built a gilded cage for you, Gavin," Sterling said, his voice laced with contempt. "He gave you everything you ever wanted, all to make his daughter happy. He propped you up, cleared your path, and made you a king. And all he asked in return was that you treat her with respect, that you cherish the one thing in his life that he couldn't buy." Gavin looked up, his eyes wild with disbelief and despair. "She never said a word." "Of course not," Sterling scoffed. "She's a Beaumont. They don't boast. Besides, she was in love with you. She wanted you to believe you did it all yourself. She protected your ego, and in return you humiliated her. You threw her away for your secretary." The finality of it all crashed down on Gavin. The DoD contract, the Taiwanese supplier, the bank, the media. It was all Jonathan Beaumont. A man he'd never met, a man whose name he'd never even heard, was dismantling his life with a series of quiet phone calls from the other side of the world. "This isn't a corporate takeover, Gavin," Sterling said, delivering the final, brutal lesson. "This is a father's wrath. He's not taking your company from you. He is simply taking it back. It was never yours to begin with." Gavin Reed, the self-made king, finally understood. He wasn't being attacked. He was being repossessed. Leaving Robert Sterling's office, Gavin felt like he was walking through a dream. The bustling streets of New York, the blaring horns, the crowds of people, it all seemed distant and unreal. He was a ghost in his own life. The man who had walked into that building an hour ago, desperate but still defiant, was gone. In his place was a hollow shell, filled with the horrifying knowledge of his own insignificance. He flew back to Los Angeles in a daze. When he walked into the offices of Valerius Innovations, the atmosphere was toxic. The remaining employees looked at him with a mixture of fear and contempt. The news of Sterling Finch's divestment was public now, and the company was in a death spiral. Kendra was waiting for him in his office, her face a mask of fury. The fear and anxiety were gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated anger. "The bank just called," she hissed, her voice sharp as broken glass. "They're calling in our corporate loans, all of them, and they've frozen my company credit card. What the hell is going on, Gavin? You told me this was a setback." Gavin sank into his leather chair, the one that had always made him feel so powerful. Now, it felt like it was swallowing him whole. He looked at Kendra, at her expensive designer dress, her perfectly coiffed hair, the greedy ambition in her eyes. This was what he had thrown his life away for. This was more. "It's over, Kendra," he said, his voice a dead monotone. "What do you mean, it's over? You fix it. You're Gavin Reed. You built this company from nothing," she screamed. He let out a hollow, broken laugh. "No, I didn't. I didn't build any of it." And then he told her. He told her everything. About Audrey, about Jonathan Beaumont, about the sandbox he'd been playing in for 12 years. He watched as her expression shifted from anger to disbelief, and then, finally, to a cold, calculating horror. She wasn't horrified by what had been done to him. She was horrified that she had bet on the wrong horse. She had hitched her wagon to a puppet whose strings had just been cut. "Her father," she stammered. "Your quiet, boring little wife is the daughter of some invisible kingpin." "Looks that way," Gavin said, with a shrug of utter defeat. Kendra stared at him for a long moment, her mind clearly working, reassessing her position. The dream of being the partner of a tech billionaire was dead. What was left was the man in front of her. A fraud, a failure, a man who was about to be financially annihilated. "I see," she said, her voice suddenly calm and detached. She picked up her purse from his desk. "Well, this has been an educational experience." "Where are you going?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Out," she said, not even bothering to look at him. "I'm a killer, Gavin. Remember? You said so yourself. And killers know when a target has been neutralized. There's nothing left for me here." She walked out of his office without a backward glance, her heels clicking on the marble floor like a ticking clock counting down the final seconds of his life. He didn't try to stop her. He didn't have the energy. The rest of the day was a blur of legal notices, bankruptcy filings, and calls from creditors. His corporate lawyer, a man who had been with him for years, informed him that he would have to sell everything: the glass house, the Aston Martin, the art collection, to satisfy his personal guarantees on the business loans. He would be left with less than nothing. By the end of the week, Valerius Innovations was formally declared bankrupt. The sign was taken down from the building. The employees were gone. The offices were locked, a tombstone for an empire that was never real. Gavin found himself in a small, rented apartment in the valley, surrounded by boxes of what little personal effects he had managed to keep. He was a pariah. His name was mud in the tech world. No one would return his calls. He was 42 years old, and his life was over. It was in that lonely, quiet apartment that the rage finally subsided, replaced by a profound and aching regret. He thought about Audrey. Not Audrey Beaumont, the powerful heiress, but Audrey Reed, his wife. He remembered the early years before the money and the ambition had consumed him. He remembered her quiet support, her unwavering belief in him, her gentle smile. She had loved him. The real him, the struggling, dreaming young man. And he had taken that love and carelessly, cruelly thrown it away. He had to see her. He had to talk to her. It wasn't about the money anymore. It wasn't about getting his life back. It was about understanding, about facing the woman he had so profoundly underestimated. He found out from one of her old friends, one of the few people who would still speak to him, that she was staying at a family estate in Santa Barbara. Driven by a desperate, last-ditch need for some kind of closure, he got in his rental car and began the drive up the coast. He had no idea what he would say, but he knew he had to face her one last time. The drive up the Pacific Coast Highway was a surreal torment. The California sun, a brilliant, indifferent orb, glinted off the sapphire water, and the coastline unfolded in a panorama of breathtaking beauty that felt like a personal insult to Gavin. Each stunning vista, each crashing wave was a reminder of a world of beauty and power he was no longer a part of. He was a ghost driving a cheap rental car through a paradise he had forfeited. His hands gripped the plastic steering wheel, a stark contrast to the familiar feel of handcrafted leather and polished walnut. He was driving towards his past, hoping for an absolution he knew he didn't deserve. He had no real plan, only a desperate, gnawing need to see her, to stand before the woman he had so profoundly misjudged, and perhaps understand the full scope of his own ruin. He wasn't seeking forgiveness. He was seeking the source code of his own destruction. Following the discreet directions, he turned off the main road and into the hills of Montecito. The air grew cooler, scented with eucalyptus and old money. He soon arrived at a pair of immense, wrought-iron gates set into a high stone wall that seemed to have grown out of the landscape itself. There was no ostentatious nameplate, no gaudy display of wealth. There was only a quiet, intimidating permanence. This was a fortress, not a mansion. He announced himself into a nearly invisible intercom, his voice sounding small and pathetic. Gavin Reed, to see Audrey. He expected a swift, cold denial. Instead, after a moment of silence, a disembodied voice instructed him to wait. A security guard, a man with the build and placid demeanor of a Secret Service agent, emerged from a small gatehouse. He consulted a tablet, his eyes flicking from the screen to Gavin's face, a flicker of something, recognition, contempt, passing through them. With a curt nod, the heavy gates swung inward with a silent, hydraulic hum. He was being permitted entry. This was not an act of mercy, Gavin realized, but a summons. The driveway was a long, winding path through a forest of ancient, manicured oaks and lush gardens that looked more like a national park than a private residence. His rental car felt like a scar on the pristine asphalt. He finally emerged into a grand motor court in front of a sprawling, Mediterranean-style estate of pale stone and terracotta tiles. It was not a house. It was an ancestral seat of power, a place that measured time in generations, not fiscal quarters. A man in a simple, impeccably tailored grey suit met him before he even got out of the car. "Mr. Reed, this way, please." The man's tone was neutral, his expression unreadable, which was somehow more unnerving than open hostility. Gavin was led not through the grand front entrance, but around the side of the house, a subtle but clear indication of his status as an unwelcome visitor. They walked through a gallery of glass and stone, past sculptures and paintings that Gavin, even in his diminished state, recognized as priceless masterpieces. Each silent footstep on the marble floors echoed the hollowness inside him. Finally, they emerged onto a vast stone terrace that overlooked the endless blue of the Pacific Ocean. And there she was. She was sitting at a small, wrought-iron table, a tall glass of iced tea sweating beside her. The Audrey he knew, would have been lost in such a grand setting, a quiet figure swallowed by the scale of it all. But this woman commanded it. Dressed in a simple but exquisitely cut white linen dress, her hair swept back from her face, she seemed to be a part of the landscape, as natural and powerful as the ocean before her. The timid, accommodating woman he had discarded was gone. In her place sat a queen upon her throne. She turned her head slowly as he approached. Her hazel eyes, the same eyes that had once looked at him with such adoration, were now clear, calm, and utterly unreadable. They held no anger, no sadness, and most devastatingly, no love. They held nothing for him at all. "Gavin," she said, and her voice was the same, yet entirely different. It was imbued with a low, resonant confidence he had never heard before. "I was told you were coming." He stopped a few feet from her table, a supplicant before the throne. The carefully rehearsed apologies, the desperate explanations he had mumbled to himself during the long drive, they all evaporated in the face of her profound stillness. They were the words of a boy, and he was standing before a woman. "Audrey, he began, his voice cracking, failing him. He gestured vaguely, helplessly. "I don't even know what to say." "Then don't say anything," she replied, her tone not unkind, but firm. It was the voice of someone who no longer had time for pointless pleasantries. She gestured to the empty chair opposite her. "Sit." He sank into the chair, which felt far too ornate for the wreck of a man he had become. For a moment, they just sat in a silence that was filled with the ghosts of their 12 years together. "I didn't come here to ask for anything," he finally managed, the words rushing out in a torrent of defeat. "Not for the money, not for the company. It's all gone, I know that. I had to understand. I had to see you." "And now you see me," she said, taking a slow, deliberate sip of her tea. Her gaze was direct, unwavering. "Has it helped your understanding?" "He destroyed me," Gavin whispered, the words sounding childish even to his own ears. "Your father. He took everything from me." Audrey placed her glass on the table with a soft, definitive click. She leaned forward, and for the first time, a flicker of fire entered her eyes. It was not the fire of rage, but the cold, intense flame of absolute clarity. "You are mistaken, Gavin," she said, her voice dropping, each word precisely chosen and sharpened to a point. "My father did not take anything from you. He simply reclaimed his assets, the capital, the political connections, the strategic opportunities. They were all loans, an investment portfolio he managed for one reason only: my happiness. That was the collateral. When you walked out that door, after telling me my life's work was not real, you defaulted on that loan in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. The collateral was seized. It was, to use a term you've always been fond of, a simple business transaction." She threw his own callous philosophy back at him, and it struck him with the force of a physical blow. "The cruelty, Gavin," she continued, her voice level but cutting. "That was the part that sealed the deal. Leaving me was one thing. Humiliating me was another. You didn't just break a vow. You tried to break my spirit. You looked at me with such contempt, as if I were a piece of outdated software you needed to delete to free up space. You told me you needed a killer, that I was too comfortable. You stood in a world built for you by my family's protection, and you called me the one who was sheltered." She leaned back, a faint, sad smile touching her lips that did not reach her eyes. "And the great, cosmic irony is, you were nothing without me. Not without my love, which you took for granted, and not without my father's power, which you never even knew existed." A heavy silence descended, filled only by the whisper of the sea breeze. He could not argue. He could not defend himself. She had stripped him bare with nothing but the truth. Just then, a shadow fell across the table. Gavin looked up, and his breath caught in his throat. An older man stood there, having approached with a complete silence that was in itself unnerving. He was tall and lean, with a full head of silver hair and eyes the exact same shade of penetrating hazel as Audrey's. He was dressed casually in a linen shirt and trousers, yet he radiated an aura of quiet, absolute authority that made titans like Robert Sterling seem like loud, posturing amateurs. This was Jonathan Beaumont. This was the ghost who had dismantled his world. "Is this man bothering you, sweetheart?" Jonathan asked, his voice soft, almost gentle, yet it carried an unmistakable undertone of menace. He looked only at Audrey, dismissing Gavin's presence as utterly as one might dismiss an insect. "No, Dad," Audrey said, the hard edge in her voice instantly melting as she looked at her father. He was just leaving. The words were a command. The audience was over. Gavin pushed himself to his feet, his body feeling like lead. His legs were unsteady. He looked from the daughter to the father at the unbreakable alignment between them, the shared, quiet power. He had not just wronged a woman, he had trespassed against a force of nature. Without another word, he turned and began the long walk of shame back the way he had come. As he reached the edge of the terrace, he heard their voices behind him, calm and clear, already moving on to a world in which he had no part. "The jet is ready for you whenever you're finished here, Audrey," Jonathan said. "The preliminary reports for the Foundation's new arts endowment are in. The curators from the Louvre and the Met are flying in for the New York meeting on Friday. They're all very excited to hear your final proposal." Gavin didn't look back. He just kept walking, the sun-drenched beauty of the estate now feeling like a beautiful, elaborate tomb. He was a ghost, leaving the world of the living behind. The image of Audrey, the serene and powerful queen on her throne, forever burned into the wreckage of his memory. 6 months later, the name Gavin Reed had become a whisper in the corridors of power he once dominated. It was a ghost story told by venture capitalists over expensive whiskey, a cautionary tale about a modern Icarus who flew too close to a sun he never knew existed. His spectacular downfall was the stuff of legend, but the man himself was gone, erased from the landscape he had once sought to conquer. The reality was far less mythical. Gavin lived in a third-floor walk-up in Van Nuys, an apartment that perpetually smelled of stale coffee and the quiet desperation of its tenant. His kingdom had shrunk to a single room with a sagging sofa and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. The Aston Martin had been liquidated, along with the art, the watches, and the last vestiges of his pride. It was all consumed in the ravenous fire of his bankruptcy, leaving him with a mountain of personal debt and a reputation so toxic that it was an automatic disqualifier for any meaningful work. He now worked for a small logistics firm, a job he'd found through a temp agency that hadn't bothered to Google his name. He was an analyst, a number cruncher in a sea of cubicles, his world reduced to spreadsheets and shipping manifests. The irony was a constant, bitter companion. He, who had once designed global navigation systems for the military, was now tracking pallets of consumer electronics from Shenzhen to Fresno. Some days, the humiliation was a physical weight. He would overhear younger, ambitious colleagues talking about the legendary collapse of Valerius Innovations. They spoke of it with a kind of morbid excitement, dissecting the hubris of its founder, a man they imagined as a Bond villain, brought down by some shadowy corporate rival. Gavin would just sit there, staring at his screen, his face a neutral mask, the ghost at their feast. But as the months wore on, the rage and humiliation began to curdle into something else, something deeper and more painful, a profound and hollow regret. Later tonight, in the suffocating silence of his apartment, it wasn't the loss of the penthouse or the roar of his car's engine that haunted him. It was the memory of Audrey's face. He remembered the small things he had long forgotten, the way she would bring him a cup of tea, exactly how he liked it, without him ever having to ask. Her quiet, intelligent laughter at a shared joke in the early years, the unwavering, unconditional belief in her eyes back when he was just a man with a dream, long before he became a monster of ambition. She had loved him. Not the CEO, not the mogul, but the man. He had taken that pure, foundational love and treated it like a starter company he'd outgrown. He'd traded it for Kendra's cheap, transactional admiration, a currency that proved worthless the moment his value plummeted. Gavin Reed, the self-made king, finally understood his true failure. He hadn't lost a business deal. He had lost his soul. While Gavin was fading into obscurity, Audrey Beaumont was stepping into the light. She did not retreat into the protective, opulent shell of her family's wealth. Instead, she took the immense power that was her birthright and began to forge it into an instrument of her own design. She accepted the position of chairwoman of the Beaumont Foundation, an institution that had, for decades, operated with the same quiet, behind-the-scenes influence as her father. Audrey, however, had no interest in the shadows. Her first act was to bring the foundation into the public eye. She began by reshaping its core mission, her vision sharpened by the painful clarity of her own experience. She announced the creation of the Vanguard Initiative, a venture capital fund with a singular purpose: to invest in female-led startups, specifically in sectors where women were historically overlooked. She remembered Gavin's dismissive words, "I need sharp, I need a killer," and she resolved to fund an army of sharp, brilliant women, not to be killers but to be builders. Her presence was a revelation. In boardrooms filled with grizzled old money trustees, she spoke with a calm, data-driven authority that was impossible to dispute. At global economic forums, she took to the stage and captivated audiences not with fiery rhetoric, but with a fierce, articulate intelligence. She spoke of turning the glass ceiling into a glass floor for the next generation. She moved with a grace and purpose that made it clear she was not a figurehead. She was the architect. The world took notice. Magazine articles that once would have featured her on the society pages now analyzed her investment strategies in their business sections. She was no longer defined by her association with any man, not as Gavin Reed's ex-wife, nor even as Jonathan Beaumont's daughter. She was simply Audrey, a force of nature, a name that was becoming its own legacy. One cool evening in her Geneva apartment, overlooking the tranquil lake, she was on a video call with her father. He was in his study in London, a half smile of deep pride on his face. "The Vanguard Initiative has outperformed every projection, Audrey," Jonathan said, his voice imbued with a warmth he reserved only for her. "Your instincts were more than correct. You've done more than just generate returns. You've created a new paradigm." "You gave me the tools, Dad," she replied, her own smile genuine. "I'm just finally building something of my own with them." His expression softened, turning serious. "I find myself feeling regret, you know, for what you endured." I saw the flaws in him from the beginning. His ambition was a cancer. "Perhaps I should have intervened," said something years ago. Audrey considered this for a moment, her gaze drifting towards the window, where the lights of the city glittered on the dark water. "No," she said, her voice firm but gentle. It was a lesson I had to learn for myself. For 12 years, I lived a comfortable, beautiful life in a cage I didn't even realize existed. I thought my purpose was to be a supportive reflection of his light. She shook her head slowly. I needed him to be cruel. I needed him to be dismissive. I needed him to show me exactly how little I meant to him, so I could finally discover how much I could mean to myself. She met her father's eyes on the screen, her own clear and full of a strength that had been forged in fire. In a strange way, Dad, Gavin gave me the most valuable gift of my life. He showed me the cage I was in, and then he handed me the key. After the call ended, she stood by the window for a long time. She was not thinking of Gavin. She was not thinking of the past. She was looking forward, at the endless expanse of the night sky, seeing not a void, but a universe of possibilities. The quiet, unassuming wife was a ghost, a memory. The woman standing here, bathed in the soft glow of city lights, was the master of her own empire, one built not on deceit and ego, but on purpose, resilience, and the unshakable knowledge of her own worth. And it was just the beginning. And so, Gavin Reed's empire, built on a foundation of borrowed power and broken trust, vanished like a mirage in the desert. This story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't always loud and aggressive. Sometimes it's the quiet dignity of a person who knows their own worth, even when others try to diminish it. Audrey's story shows us that the most profound power doesn't come from a title or a bank account, but from integrity, resilience, and the courage to reclaim your own identity after it's been shattered. It's a testament to the fact that sometimes the end of one story is the explosive beginning of a much better one. What did you think of Audrey's transformation? Do you believe Gavin got what he deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of karma and empowerment, please hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next tale of justice served. Thank you for listening.